Isabella Martinez stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her downtown office, wondering why she had agreed to this ridiculous idea. Her assistant Lisa had been pestering her for months about getting back into the dating scene. "You can't work forever," Lisa would say, placing yet another cup of coffee on Isabella's desk. "You're 32, successful and beautiful. You deserve happiness. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the accident that changed everything. 3 years since that rainy Tuesday morning when a drunk driver ran a red light and turned her world upside down. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. But some days Isabella wondered what luck really meant when you're suddenly navigating a world that wasn't built for wheels. She had thrown herself into work after the accident, building her tech company from a small startup into a major player in the industry. Work was safe. Work was something she could control. Work didn't look at her with pity or whisper behind her back about what a tragedy it all was. But Lisa was persistent, and eventually Isabella gave in. "Just one date," she had said. "If it's terrible, I'll never bring it up again." Now, adjusting her blazer and checking her lipstick one more time, Isabella regretted that decision. The restaurant Lisa had chosen was upscale and trendy, the kind of place where business deals were made over expensive wine and artisanal everything. Isabella had specifically asked for somewhere with good accessibility, and to Lisa's credit, she had done her research. Isabella arrived at Bella Vista exactly on time, as she always did. The hostess guided her to a table near the window, where she had a clear view of the busy street outside. The evening crowd was just beginning to arrive, well-dressed professionals unwinding after another long day in the corporate world. She ordered a sparkling water and checked her phone. Ryan Carter, her date, was supposed to be there at 7. It was now 7:15. Isabella tried not to read too much into it. Traffic in the city could be unpredictable, and maybe he was just running late. By 7:30, she was starting to feel the familiar weight of embarrassment settling in her chest. The server had come by twice, politely asking if she needed anything else, and Isabella could see the curious glances from other diners. She was about to call it quits when a man in a navy suit hurried through the entrance, scanning the room with obvious impatience. "Isabella, sorry I'm late. Traffic was absolutely insane." Ryan Carter was exactly as Lisa had described him. Tall, well-groomed, the kind of guy who probably spent more on his haircut than most people spent on groceries. He slid into the chair across from her without really looking at her, immediately pulling out his phone and placing it on the table. "No problem," Isabella said, though it kind of was. Punctuality mattered to her, especially for first impressions. Ryan finally looked up from his phone and seemed to notice her wheelchair for the first time. His expression shifted slightly, and Isabella felt that familiar knot form in her stomach. She had seen that look before, the quick calculation, the moment when someone realized what they were dealing with and had to quickly adjust their expectations. "So," Ryan said, flagging down the server, "Lisa told me you run a tech company. That must be challenging." There it was. The word that people used when they didn't want to say what they really meant. Not impressive or exciting, challenging, as if her success was somehow more surprising because of her disability. "I enjoy what I do," Isabella replied diplomatically. "What about you? Lisa mentioned you work in finance." Ryan launched into what seemed like a rehearsed speech about his position at a major investment firm, dropping names and numbers with the casual arrogance of someone who had never had to prove himself beyond his resume. Isabella nodded politely, but her attention was already starting to drift. The server came by to take their order, and Isabella was grateful for the interruption. She ordered the salmon while Ryan chose the most expensive steak on the menu without even glancing at the prices. "You know," Ryan said, cutting into his appetizer, "I have to admit, I wasn't sure what to expect tonight. I mean, when Lisa told me about the situation, I wondered if this was such a good idea." Isabella's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "The situation? Well, you know." Ryan gestured vaguely toward her wheelchair. "I just wasn't sure how it would work. Dating someone who's, disabled," Isabella said flatly. "The word you're looking for is disabled." Ryan looked uncomfortable. "Right. I just meant it must be difficult for you to get around, do normal things. Like, can you even live on your own?" The question hit Isabella like a physical blow. This wasn't curiosity or genuine interest. This was pity wrapped up in polite conversation. She had built a multi-million-dollar company, employed over 200 people, and gave presentations to investors who hung on her every word. But to this man, she was defined entirely by what she couldn't do. "I managed just fine," she said, her voice cooler now. Ryan seemed oblivious to her change in tone. "That's great, really inspiring. You're like one of those motivational speakers, you know. Overcoming adversity and all that." Isabella felt her jaw clench. She wasn't anyone's inspiration. She was just a person trying to live her life. And comments like that reduced her entire existence to a feel-good story for other people's comfort. The conversation limped along through the main course, with Ryan dominating the discussion with stories about his recent promotion, his new car, and his weekend plans to play golf with clients. He asked Isabella a few perfunctory questions, but she could tell he wasn't really listening to her answers. Then his phone rang. "Sorry, I have to take this," Ryan said, not waiting for her response. "Carter here." Isabella watched in disbelief as Ryan launched into what was clearly a work conversation, discussing some deal with animated hand gestures while their food grew cold. Other diners were starting to stare, and Isabella felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. 20 minutes later, Ryan finally hung up. "Sorry about that. Big client, you understand." "Where were we?" "I think we were finishing up," Isabella said quietly. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. Work is work, right? You must understand, running a business and all." But Isabella had reached her limit. The lateness, the condescending comments, the phone call that treated her like she was invisible. It was all too much. She signaled for the check, ready to end this disaster of an evening. "Listen," Ryan said as they waited for the server. "Maybe we should keep things simple, you know? I mean, this whole dating thing can be complicated, and with your limitations, maybe it's better if we just call it a night." Isabella stared at him, speechless. He was actually suggesting that her disability made her too much trouble to date. The worst part was the way he said it, like he was doing her a favor by being honest. "You're right," she said finally. "Let's definitely call it a night." Ryan seemed relieved. He threw some cash on the table, enough to cover his meal but not the full bill, and stood up. "Great meeting you, Isabella. Maybe I'll see you around," and then he was gone, leaving Isabella sitting alone at the table with the curious stares of other diners and the crushing weight of humiliation. She paid the full check, including a generous tip for the server who had witnessed the entire awkward spectacle, and made her way toward the exit. The restaurant was busier now, with people waiting for tables and the dinner rush in full swing. That's when her wheelchair chose the worst possible moment to malfunction. The electronic controls sparked once, then died completely. Isabella found herself stranded near the entrance, unable to move forward or backward, as people flowed around her like water around a stone. Some offered help, but most just tried to navigate around her, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Isabella closed her eyes and took a deep breath, fighting back tears of frustration and embarrassment. This was exactly why she didn't date. This was exactly why she kept her world small and controlled, because moments like this reminded her how quickly everything could fall apart. She pulled out her phone to call a cab, wondering how she was going to explain to the driver that she needed help getting to the car when she heard a voice beside her. "Excuse me, miss? Looks like you might need some help with that." Isabella looked up to see a man crouched beside her wheelchair, studying the control panel with genuine concern. He was nothing like the polished professionals she was used to dealing with. His jeans were faded and marked with what looked like oil stains, and his dark hair was slightly messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it. But his brown eyes were kind, and when he spoke to her, he looked directly at her face, not down at her with pity. "I'm Diego," he said simply. "Mind if I take a look at what's going on here?" Isabella was so surprised by his straightforward approach that she just nodded. Most people either ignored her completely when something went wrong, or they hovered around asking what they should do, making her feel like a problem to be solved rather than a person who might actually know what she needed. Diego pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and examined the control panel more closely. "Looks like you've got some kind of electrical short," he said, pointing to a small scorch mark near the joystick. "The wiring probably got overheated. These electronic systems can be tricky sometimes." "You seem to know a lot about it," Isabella said, surprised by how calm he was about the whole situation. "I fix things." "As for a living," Diego replied with a slight smile. "Cars, trucks, motorcycles, Electronics are electronics, whether they're in a vehicle or a wheelchair. He stood up and brushed off his knees. I've got some tools in my truck that might help. Would it be okay if I brought them over? I think I can at least get you mobile enough to get home safely. Isabella hesitated. She didn't know this man at all, and 3 years of careful independence had taught her to be wary of accepting help from strangers. But she was stuck in the middle of a busy restaurant entrance. People were starting to stare more obviously, and she really didn't have many options. That would be great, she said finally. Thank you. Diego nodded and disappeared through the crowd. Isabella watched him go, noticing that he moved with the easy confidence of someone who was comfortable in his own skin. There was something refreshing about his complete lack of awkwardness around her situation. While she waited, Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, asking how the date was going. She stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "I'll call you tomorrow." There was no way she was explaining this disaster over text. A few minutes later, Diego returned carrying a small toolbox. He knelt beside the wheelchair again and opened it up, revealing an organized collection of screwdrivers, wire strippers, and other tools that Isabella couldn't identify. "I'm going to disconnect the battery for a second and take a look at the wiring," Diego explained. "The chair won't move at all while I'm doing this, but it should only take a few minutes." Isabella appreciated that he told her exactly what he was planning to do. Too many people just started doing things to her chair without explanation, as if she wasn't part of the process. Diego worked quietly, his movements precise and methodical. Isabella found herself studying his hands as he worked. They were strong and calloused, clearly hands that were used to manual labor, but they moved with a surprising gentleness as he handled the delicate wiring. "So what brings you to Bella Vista?" Isabella asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to fill the silence. "It doesn't exactly seem like your usual crowd." Diego chuckled, not looking up from his work. "My cousin Maria works in the kitchen here. I was picking up dinner for the guys at my shop. We're working late tonight on a vintage Mustang, and Maria always makes sure we don't survive on vending machine food." "That's sweet of her," Isabella said. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had worried about whether she was eating properly. "Maria's good people," Diego agreed. "She's been trying to fatten me up since we were kids. Says I'm too skinny for my own good." Isabella smiled despite herself. There was something comforting about Diego's easy way of talking, the casual mention of family and friends who cared about each other. Her own world had become so focused on business and achievement that she sometimes forgot what normal relationships looked like. "There we go," Diego said, straightening up. "I bypassed the damage section and created a temporary connection. It's not pretty, but it should get you home. You'll want to have a real technician look at it tomorrow, though." He reconnected the battery and stepped back. Isabella tested the controls and the wheelchair responded smoothly. Relief flooded through her. "This is amazing," she said. "How much do I owe you?" Diego looked genuinely confused by the question. "Nothing. I was just helping out." "But you used your time, your tools." "Isabella," Diego said, and she realized she must have introduced herself earlier without remembering. "It took me 10 minutes and cost me nothing. You don't owe me anything." Isabella stared at him. In her world, everything had a price. Every favor came with an expectation. Every kindness was really an investment in future returns. The idea that someone would help her simply because she needed help was almost foreign to her. "At least let me buy you coffee sometime," she said. "As a thank you." Diego considered this for a moment. "Tell you what," he said, pulling a business card from his wallet. "If that repair doesn't hold up, give me a call. My shop isn't too far from here, and I'd be happy to take a proper look at it." Isabella took the card. It was simple and straightforward. Rodriguez Auto Repair with an address and phone number. No fancy logo, no marketing slogans, just the essential information. "I should probably get going," Isabella said, though she found herself reluctant to end the conversation. "Thank you again, Diego, really." "No problem," Diego said, gathering up his tools. "Drive safe, okay? And remember, if that chair starts acting up again, don't try to fix it yourself. These electrical systems can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing." Isabella nodded and started to move toward the exit, then paused and looked back. Diego was closing his toolbox, apparently getting ready to go back inside for his cousin's food. "Diego?" she called out. He looked up. "Yeah, can I ask you something?" "Weren't you even a little bit surprised? I mean, when you saw me stuck here?" Diego tilted his head, seeming to consider the question seriously. Surprised about what? That your wheelchair broke down? Machines break down all the time. It's what they do. But most people... Isabella started, then stopped. She wasn't sure how to explain the looks, the assumptions, the way people treated her like she was made of glass. Most people don't know how to fix things, Diego said simply. Lucky for you, I do. It was such a matter-of-fact response that Isabella almost laughed. To Diego, this hadn't been about her disability or some inspiring moment of overcoming adversity. It had just been a machine that needed fixing and a person who needed help. Right, she said. Well, thank you again. Anytime, Diego said, and something in his tone made Isabella believe he actually meant it. As Isabella made her way to her car, she found herself thinking about the contrast between her evening's two encounters. Ryan had seen her disability as a limitation, something that made her less capable and more complicated. Diego had seen a mechanical problem that needed solving. The difference was startling. Isabella's car was equipped with hand controls that allowed her to drive normally, and she transferred into the driver's seat with the practiced efficiency of 3 years' experience. As she loaded her wheelchair into the specially modified storage area, she caught herself looking back toward the restaurant. Through the large windows, she could see Diego at the pickup counter, talking easily with someone who must be his cousin Maria. They were both laughing about something, and Diego's whole face lit up with genuine joy. When was the last time she had laughed like that? When was the last time she had been around people who made her feel normal instead of exceptional? Isabella started her car and pulled out of the parking garage, but Diego's business card sat on her passenger seat where she could see it. For some reason, she found herself hoping that the temporary repair wouldn't hold up. The drive home took her through the city's downtown district, past the gleaming office buildings where she spent most of her waking hours. But tonight, instead of thinking about tomorrow's meetings or the quarterly report she needed to review, Isabella found herself wondering what Diego's auto shop looked like, whether he enjoyed his work, and why his simple kindness had affected her so much. By the time she reached her apartment building, Isabella had made a decision. Maybe the wheelchair would hold up just fine, but she was going to find a reason to call that number anyway. For the first time in 3 years, she was curious about someone who had nothing to do with her business or her carefully controlled world. As she got ready for bed that night, Isabella realized she was smiling. The evening had started as a disaster, but somehow, it had ended with the first spark of genuine interest she had felt in a very long time. 2 days later, Isabella was in the middle of a video conference with potential investors when her wheelchair died completely. One moment she was explaining her company's quarterly growth projections, and the next moment the screen went black and every electronic function shut down. She was stuck in her office, unable to move. Isabella stared at Diego's business card, which she had kept in her desk drawer. She could call her usual medical equipment company, but they would take hours to respond and probably charge her a fortune for an emergency visit. Or she could call the man who had already proven he could fix the problem. She dialed the number. Rodriguez Auto Repair, this is Diego. Hi, it's Isabella. From the restaurant the other night? My wheelchair just died completely. Are you somewhere safe? Diego asked immediately, and Isabella was touched by his genuine concern. I'm in my office downtown, 23rd floor of the Sterling building. I'll be right there, Diego said without hesitation. Don't try to move it or mess with any of the wiring, okay? 30 minutes later, Isabella's assistant knocked on her office door. There's a Diego Rodriguez here to see you. He says it's about your chair. Isabella had forgotten that Diego would have to get past building security and find his way to her office. She suddenly wondered what he would think of her world. The expensive art on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the obvious signs of wealth and success. When Diego walked in, he looked around briefly but didn't seem impressed or intimidated. He was wearing clean jeans and a work shirt with his name embroidered on the pocket, and he carried a larger toolbox than before. So this is where the magic happens, he said with a slight smile. Nice view. Thanks, Isabella said, feeling oddly nervous. I'm sorry to drag you all the way down here. I know you must be busy. Not a problem, Diego said, already kneeling beside her chair. Let's see what we're dealing with. As Diego worked, Isabella found herself watching him again. He moved through her sterile office space like he belonged there, completely unfazed by the corporate environment that intimidated so many people. Looks like the temporary fix finally gave out, Diego said after a few minutes. The whole control board is fried. This is going to need more than a quick repair. Isabella's heart sank. How long will it take to fix? Well, I'd have to order parts, and that could take a few days. But I've got a better idea if you're up for it. Diego stood up and brushed off his hands. I've got a backup wheelchair at my shop. It's not as fancy as this one, but it's reliable. You could use it while I fix yours properly. Isabella hesitated. She had never been to an auto repair shop before, and the idea of venturing into Diego's world felt both exciting and terrifying. Where exactly is your shop? She asked. About 15 minutes from here in the warehouse district. Fair warning, though. It's not exactly corporate headquarters. It's loud. It smells like motor oil, and my guys aren't used to visitors in business suits. There was something in Diego's tone that made Isabella think he was testing her, waiting to see if she would back down when faced with stepping outside her comfort zone. Let's go, she said. Diego's face lit up with surprise and approval. All right then. I'll carry the chair down to my truck and you can ride with me. The ride to Diego's shop was unlike anything Isabella had experienced in years. Diego drove an older pickup truck that was clean but clearly well used, and he talked easily about his work, his employees, and the neighborhood they were driving through. Isabella realized she had no idea what the city looked like beyond her usual route between home, office, and a few upscale restaurants. That's it, Diego said, pulling up to a modest building with Rodriguez Auto Repair, painted on the side in simple block letters. The shop was exactly as Diego had described, loud, busy, and smelling strongly of motor oil and metal. 3 other mechanics were working on various cars, and Spanish music played from a radio somewhere in the back. Isabella felt like she had stepped into a completely different world. Guys, Diego called out, we've got a visitor. This is Isabella. The other mechanics looked up and waved casually, then went back to their work. No staring, no awkward questions, no treating her like she was fragile or inspiring. Isabella was struck by how normal it felt. Diego led her to a corner of the shop where a basic wheelchair sat next to a workbench. This belongs to my friend Tony, he explained. He's a veteran who comes in sometimes to help out. He won't mind if you borrow it for a few days. As Diego adjusted the chair to fit Isabella properly, she found herself asking, how do you know so much about wheelchairs? Diego's hands paused for a moment. My dad was in a car accident when I was 15, he said quietly. Broke his back. He used a chair for the last 10 years of his life. I'm sorry, Isabella said, suddenly understanding why Diego had been so comfortable around her from the beginning. He was a good man, Diego said simply. Taught me that broken things can still work. They just need someone who knows how to fix them properly. There was something profound in that statement that Isabella couldn't quite put into words. Diego finished adjusting the chair and stepped back. There you go. It's not fancy, but it'll get you where you need to go. Isabella tested the controls. The chair was basic compared to her high-tech model, but it was solid and responsive. This is perfect. Thank you. Coffee? Diego asked, pointing to a small office area with a coffee maker and a couple of mismatched chairs. Isabella found herself saying yes, even though she had 3 meetings scheduled for that afternoon. Something about this place made her want to stay, to learn more about Diego's world. They sat in the small office area, drinking surprisingly good coffee from chipped mugs while the sounds of the working shop provided a constant background hum. Isabella felt more relaxed than she had in months. Can I ask you something? Diego said. What's it like running a company? I mean, all those people depending on you for their jobs, all that pressure? Isabella considered the question. Most people asked about her success in terms of achievements and recognition, but Diego was asking about the weight of responsibility. Terrifying, she said honestly. Every decision affects hundreds of people. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'm making the right choices. But you love it, Diego said. It wasn't a question. I do, Isabella admitted. Even when it's scary, even when it's overwhelming, I love building something, creating jobs, solving problems. Sounds familiar, Diego said with a smile. Just on a different scale. They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their work, their challenges, their dreams. Isabella learned that Diego had built his shop from nothing after his father's death, that he employed people others wouldn't hire, and that he had a reputation for fixing things other mechanics said were hopeless. Diego learned that Isabella's company developed accessibility software, that she had started it specifically to create solutions for people with disabilities, and that her biggest frustration was dealing with investors who saw disability as a niche market, rather than a fundamental design consideration. "You know what's funny?" Isabella said as they prepared to leave. "I've been in more board meetings today than I usually attend in a week, but this is the first conversation I've had that actually mattered." Diego looked at her seriously. "Maybe you're spending time with the wrong people." As Diego drove Isabella back to her office, she found herself reluctant for the afternoon to end. The backup wheelchair worked perfectly, but she was already looking forward to having an excuse to visit the shop again. "I'll call you when your chair is ready," Diego said as they pulled up to her building. "Diego?" Isabella said as he was getting out to help her with the wheelchair. "Yeah? Thank you. Not just for fixing my chair, but for this. For showing me your world." Diego smiled. "Any time, Isabella, really." As Isabella watched Diego drive away, she realized something had shifted inside her. For the first time in 3 years, she was thinking about something other than work. She was thinking about a man who fixed broken things and believed they could work even better than before. Back in her office, Isabella tried to focus on her meetings, but her mind kept drifting to the sounds and smells of the repair shop, to Diego's easy laughter with his employees, and to the way he had talked about his father. There was a richness to his life that she had somehow lost in her climb to success. That evening, as Isabella prepared for bed, she realized she was genuinely excited about something for the first time in months. She was excited to see Diego again, to learn more about his world and maybe, just maybe, to let him learn more about hers. 3 weeks later, Isabella found herself doing something she never thought she would do. She invited Diego to a business dinner. Her company was hosting potential investors at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, and somehow Diego's name had come up when her assistant asked if she wanted to bring a guest. "You want me to come to a business dinner?" Diego had asked when she called him. "Isabella, I fix cars for a living. I'm not exactly investor material. You're smart, you're honest, and you have more integrity than half the people who'll be there," Isabella had replied. "Besides, I could use a friend in the room." Now, watching Diego walk into the upscale restaurant wearing a borrowed suit that was slightly too big for him, Isabella wondered if she had made a mistake. Not because she was embarrassed by Diego, but because she was worried her colleagues might not appreciate what she saw in him. Diego caught her eye across the room and smiled, and Isabella felt some of her nervousness fade away. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothes, but his confidence was still there. Isabella, her business partner Kevin, approached with 2 men in expensive suits. "I'd like you to meet Robert Chen and David Martinez from Pinnacle Investment Group." Isabella shook hands with both men, immediately noticing how Robert's gaze lingered on her wheelchair before meeting her eyes. She had dealt with this kind of investor before, the ones who saw her disability as either a marketing opportunity or a liability. "Ms. Martinez," Robert said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we've heard impressive things about your company. Though I have to say, we're particularly interested in the inspiration factor of your story." There it was, the red flag that told Isabella these men didn't see her as a serious business owner, but as a feel-good story they could use to attract social impact funding. "Let me introduce you to my friend Diego Rodriguez," Isabella said, smoothly steering the conversation away from herself. "Diego owns Rodriguez Auto Repair." Diego stepped forward and shook hands with both investors. "Nice to meet you." "Auto repair," David said with barely concealed condescension. "How? Interesting." Isabella watched Diego's face remain perfectly neutral, but she could see the slight tightening around his eyes. She knew him well enough now to recognize when he was being polite, despite being insulted. The dinner proceeded awkwardly, with Robert and David dominating the conversation and making increasingly problematic comments about Isabella's company. They kept referring to her accessibility software as specking, idealized and niche, completely missing the point that universal design benefited everyone. "The thing is," Robert said over dessert, "while your software is certainly admirable from a social perspective, we're concerned about the scalability. The disabled market is quite limited, after all." Isabella felt her jaw clench. 15% of the world's population has some form of disability. That's over 1 billion people. Hardly a limited market. Of course, David said dismissively. But let's be realistic about purchasing power and market penetration. Diego, who had been quiet for most of the meal, suddenly spoke up. "Can I ask you something? Do either of you use voice-to-text on your phones?" Both men looked confused by the question. "Well, yes," Robert said. "Closed captions when you watch videos in noisy places," Diego continued. "Sometimes," David admitted. "Automatic doors at the grocery store. Ramps instead of stairs at the mall. Voice assistants in your cars?" The investors nodded, clearly not seeing where Diego was going with this. "All of those things were designed for people with disabilities first," Diego said calmly. "But they make life easier for everyone. That's not a niche market. That's good design." Isabella stared at Diego in amazement. He had just articulated her entire business philosophy more clearly than she had ever managed in countless investor presentations. Robert and David looked less impressed. "That's a very optimistic way of looking at it," Robert said with a condescending smile. The dinner ended shortly after, with vague promises from the investors to be in touch, and Isabella knowing she would never hear from them again. As the other guests filed out, Diego and Isabella found themselves alone at the table. "I'm sorry about that," Isabella said quietly. "They were worse than I expected." "You don't have anything to apologize for," Diego replied. "Those guys were jerks." Isabella appreciated Diego's bluntness, but she was also frustrated. This was exactly why she had been reluctant to expand her company's investor base. Too many people saw her disability as either inspiration or limitation, never just as part of who she was. A week later, Isabella's frustration turned to genuine concern when Kevin burst into her office with a panicked expression. "We have a problem," he announced. "A big one." Isabella looked up from her computer. "What kind of problem?" "Remember Robert Chen from Pinnacle? Turns out he's been spreading rumors that our software has security vulnerabilities. He's telling other potential investors that we're not a sound investment." Isabella felt her stomach drop. "Based on what? He never even saw a demo of our software." "That's just it," Kevin said grimly. "I think this is retaliation because we didn't fall all over ourselves trying to impress him. He's using his connections to damage our reputation." For the next few days, Isabella threw herself into damage control. She called meetings with existing investors, prepared detailed security reports, and worked 18-hour days trying to counteract the rumors. But the stress was overwhelming, and she found herself questioning everything about her business. On Thursday evening, Isabella was still in her office when Diego showed up with takeout from a Chinese restaurant. "Your assistant said you'd been here since 6 this morning," he said, setting the food on her desk. "When's the last time you ate?" Isabella couldn't remember. The past few days had been a blur of phone calls and meetings. "I'm not really hungry." "Isabella," Diego said gently. "Talk to me. What's going on?" She found herself telling him everything. About Robert's rumors, about the potential investors who were backing out, about her fear that everything she had built was going to crumble because one vindictive man saw her as an easy target. "I keep thinking," Isabella said, her voice breaking slightly, "that maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe people will always see me as the disabled CEO first and a business owner second." Diego listened without interrupting, and when Isabella finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember what you told me about your software?" he finally said. "About how it makes technology work better for everyone?" Isabella nodded. "This Robert guy, he doesn't get that because he doesn't want to get it. He's not interested in good business or good products. He's interested in feeling superior to other people." Diego leaned forward in his chair. "But here's the thing, Isabella. You've already proven him wrong. You've built something amazing. You employ over 200 people, and your software is making life better for millions of users. One angry investor can't take that away from you." Isabella felt tears she hadn't realized were building start to fall. "But what if he succeeds? What if other investors believe him?" "Then you find better investors," Diego said simply. "You find people who see what I see when I look at your company." "What do you see?" Isabella asked quietly. "I see someone who took the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into a way to help other people. I see someone who's brilliant and determined and refuses to give up, even when small-minded people try to tear her down." Diego's words hit Isabella like a physical force. No one had ever seen her that way before. Not as inspiration or tragedy, but as someone who was strong and capable and worthy of respect. And in that moment, sitting in her office with takeout containers between them and Diego, looking at her with such genuine belief, Isabella realized she was completely in love with him. The realization terrified her. Love meant vulnerability. Love meant depending on someone else. Love meant risking the independence she had fought so hard to build. And physical intimacy. Could Diego really want that with her? Would he stay when he realized all the ways her body was different? All the complications that came with loving someone with a disability? I should get back to work, Isabella said abruptly, pulling away from Diego's gaze. Diego looked confused by her sudden change in mood. Isabella, are you okay? I'm fine, she said, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Thank you for the food, but I really need to focus on this crisis. Isabella, what just happened? Did I say something wrong? Isabella couldn't look at him. Nothing happened. I just need some space to figure this out on my own. Diego was quiet for a moment, and when Isabella finally looked up, she saw hurt in his eyes. But there was understanding there too, as if he could see the fear she was trying to hide. Okay, he said softly, standing up. But Isabella, when you're ready to stop pushing people away, I'll be here. After Diego left, Isabella sat alone in her office, surrounded by the work that had always been her safe haven. But for the first time, the familiar surroundings felt empty instead of comforting. She had spent 3 years building walls to protect herself from being hurt, and now just when someone worthy had shown up, she was too scared to let those walls come down. Isabella put her head in her hands and cried, for her fear for Diego's hurt expression, and for the love she was too terrified to accept. For 3 days, Isabella buried herself in work. She held emergency meetings with her board, prepared financial reports, and made calls to every contact she had in the industry. Slowly, the crisis began to resolve itself. Several respected investors came forward to publicly support her company, and a major tech publication ran an article praising her software's innovation. But even as her professional world stabilized, Isabella felt empty inside. She kept thinking about the hurt in Diego's eyes when she had pushed him away, and she hated herself for it. On Saturday morning, Isabella sat in her apartment staring at Diego's business card. She had picked up the phone to call him a dozen times, but each time she lost her nerve. What would she say? How could she explain her fear without sounding pathetic? Finally, she decided that some conversations were too important for phone calls. Isabella drove to Rodriguez Auto Repair, her heart pounding with each block. The shop was busy with weekend customers, and she could see Diego working under the hood of a car, his movements focused and precise as always. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, gathering courage. Through the open garage doors, she could hear Diego laughing with one of his employees about something, and the sound made her chest ache with longing. When she finally wheeled herself into the shop, Diego looked up in surprise. His expression was carefully neutral, but Isabella could see the wariness in his eyes. Isabella, he said, straightening up and wiping his hands on a rag. How's your chair working out? It's fine, Isabella said, then realized how formal she sounded. Diego, can we talk? Privately. Diego glanced around the busy shop, then nodded toward his small office. Sure. They sat in the familiar space where they had shared coffee and conversation just days earlier, but now the atmosphere was tense and uncertain. I owe you an apology. Isabella began, her voice shaking slightly. And an explanation. Diego waited quietly, giving her space to find her words. When you said those things about how you see me, about what I've built, Isabella continued, it scared me. Because you're right, and because hearing you say it made me realize something I wasn't ready to face. What's that? Diego asked gently. Isabella took a deep breath. That I'm in love with you, and that terrifies me more than any business crisis ever could. Diego's eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. For 3 years, I've built my entire life around being independent. Isabella said, the words coming faster now. I've proven to myself and everyone else that I don't need anyone, that I can handle everything on my own. And then you came along, and suddenly I want to depend on someone again. I want to trust someone with my heart. Isabella's voice broke slightly. But I'm scared, Diego. I'm scared that you'll realize how complicated things are with me. I'm scared that physical intimacy will be awkward or disappointing. I'm scared that eventually you'll see me as a burden instead of a partner. She wiped away tears she didn't realize had fallen. Most of all, I'm scared that if I let myself love you completely, and you decide it's too much work, I won't survive it. Diego was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella held her breath, waiting for his response. Can I tell you something? Diego finally said. The night we met when your chair broke down, you know what I was thinking? Isabella shook her head. I was thinking that you had the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen, even though you were clearly having the worst night ever. And when you started talking about your business, your whole face lit up with passion and intelligence. I thought, this is an amazing woman. Diego leaned forward in his chair. Your wheelchair didn't even register as important to me, until I realized other people were making it the most important thing about you. And that made me angry because they were missing everything that actually matters. But Diego, Isabella said quietly, there are things about being with me that would be different, challenging. Isabella, Diego said, his voice firm but kind. I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for real. And real relationships are always challenging regardless of disability. He reached for her hands. You think I don't know that love requires work? My parents were married for 35 years through my dad's accident, through his depression afterward, through years of him learning to live differently. I watched them choose each other every single day, even when it was hard. Diego's thumbs traced circles on Isabella's hands. You're not looking for a caretaker, and I'm not looking to be one. I want a partner. Someone who challenges me, who makes me better, who builds a life with me instead of just existing in mine. Isabella felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. But what about physical things, intimacy? Diego smiled softly. Isabella, I think you're underestimating both of us. Physical connection isn't just about what your body can or can't do. It's about trust and communication and caring about each other's pleasure and comfort. That's true for everyone. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Besides, I've done my research. I've talked to couples who navigate these things, including my dad's friends from his support group. It's not about your disability making things impossible. It's about us figuring out what works for us. Isabella stared at Diego in amazement. You've been researching? Of course I have, Diego said matter-of-factly. I'm falling in love with you too, Isabella. Did you think I wasn't going to educate myself? The simple honesty of his statement broke down the last of Isabella's defenses. This man had not only accepted her disability, he had taken the time to understand it because he wanted a real future with her. I'm sorry I pushed you away, Isabella said through fresh tears. I'm sorry I got scared when things got real. Hey, Diego said, gently tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. We all get scared when something matters this much. The question is, are you ready to be scared together instead of alone? Isabella nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in her throat. Diego leaned forward and kissed her softly, and Isabella felt like she was coming home after a very long journey. 6 months later, Isabella stood in front of a room full of reporters and investors, announcing the launch of her company's new accessible design division. The initiative had grown out of her relationship with Diego and his friends in the disability community, who had helped her understand that accessibility wasn't just about software, it was about rethinking how everything was designed. Universal design isn't charity, Isabella said into the microphone. It's good business. When we design for the people who need access the most, we create solutions that work better for everyone. In the audience, Diego sat in the front row wearing his best suit, which actually fit him properly now. Next to him sat Tony, the veteran whose wheelchair Isabella had borrowed that first day, and several other members of Diego's extended community who had become part of Isabella's world too. After the presentation, as reporters asked questions and investors lined up to discuss partnerships, Isabella caught Diego's eye. He gave her a thumbs up and mouthed, "I'm proud of you," and Isabella felt her heart swell with happiness. Later that evening, at the celebration dinner held at a restaurant that was fully accessible, something Isabella now insisted on for all company events, Diego pulled her aside. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wrapped box. Isabella opened it to find a simple silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a gear. "It's from the first wheelchair I ever fixed for you," Diego explained. "I kept one of the original parts." Isabella turned the charm over in her fingers, touched by the sentiment. "It's perfect, Isabella," Diego said, taking her hands. "I know we've only been together 6 months, but I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Will you marry me?" Isabella looked at Diego, this man who had seen her at her worst and chose to stay, who had challenged her to be vulnerable and brave, who had shown her that love wasn't about being perfect but about being real. Yes, she said, laughing through happy tears. Yes, absolutely yes. As Diego slipped the ring onto her finger, Isabella realized that the scared, guarded woman who had sat through that disastrous blind date felt like a stranger now. She had learned that trust wasn't about guarantees. It was about choosing to believe in love despite the risks. And looking at Diego's joyful face, surrounded by the community they had built together, Isabella knew she had chosen well. Their wedding a year later was held at Diego's auto shop, transformed with flowers and lights into something magical. Isabella's employees mingled with Diego's mechanics. Her corporate friends laughed with his extended family, and everyone agreed it was the most genuine celebration they had ever attended. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Isabella whispered in Diego's ear, "Thank you for fixing more than just my wheelchair." Diego smiled and spun her gently. "Thank you for letting me." Isabella had learned that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as disasters, and that real love meant finding someone who saw all your broken pieces and helped you discover they were actually the strongest parts of who you are.